Life goes on. The Tuesday after Brian died, I removed his bed from his room. I asked the lads to keep what clothes were useful to them and I binned the rest. The boys had shared everything, always. I didn't want anything around that would need sorting later. I didn't want this pain to go on forever. I wanted to do things now while I was on a roll, as it were, still partly anaesthetised by shock. I didn't think that it would suit me to divide this pain up into chunks and deal with it bit by bit. It was better to face it all at once, then things could only get better. I didn't want my life to always look like this, a life with a gaping hole in it. I made arrangements to return the hospital-type bed Nurse Geraldine had supplied during Brian's illness. And I also made up my mind to get rid of his own bed out of the house too. Even though I felt having the empty bed staring at us would be difficult for the other children, it was heartrending and harrowing to actually remove it. I went back to work on the Wednesday. My head was in a spin in a whole other world. My body felt wrecked. I never expected that grief could be having such a physical as well as an emotional impact. On my coffee break in the canteen, I recall the evening my colleagues invited me to the Mass for Brian when he was seriously ill. Had that nightmare really happened? Could I wake up and find that it was all just a very bad dream? Please, could I wake up? Mostly, what I felt that day, and for a long time after, was shock and horror. I couldn't believe that in this day and age anyone could suffer so. I felt like someone had released me from a concentration camp, shocked from all that I had witnessed. Being part of the whole illness and death experience had been nerve-wracking. Every cell in my body had registered the happenings. I could only feel cold, numb. Staying calm when Brian was bleeding, struggling for every breath or trembling with pain, that was a decision. My calmness was a mask. My entire family had to deal with their own sorrows, and I had a responsibility to be strong and lead them. We came through this experience together. We didn't need any unnecessary drama. I could not get some feelings out of my mind, though. The many times when I had felt like the gun was to his head, and the many times while alone at home with Brian, I was frightened. Often I had been absolutely terrified. Was this groan to be his last? I remembered his breathing so shallow on that morning before his birthday, when I could barely hear life. Sending for the doctor, but, of course, there was nothing extra he could do. We just had to sit it out, stay smiling, for Brian's sake. The frustration of it all, the horror, the intensity of emotion. I was exhausted, physically as well as emotionally. I had stayed round the clock in the isolation ward, not even coming home for a shower on the really bad days. I had spent weeks at a time confined in a room, or sitting next to him at home or in the bedroom or front room, with no exercise, no proper food, no normality. Moving his pillows, wafting his sheets to ease the pain, giving him sips of water. It was just Brian and me and a boiling pot of emotions. Shock and horror registered as I came to terms with the violence and the relentlessness of this disease on an innocent body. Dark, primordial gut pain had immobilized my feelings. A couple of times after his death I thought I could feel Brian's presence behind me, and I worried that I was losing my sanity. John also returned to work the week after Brian died. Knowing that the brain can only think of one thing at a time, he was glad to have a little distraction from the pain of losing his son, Brian. John and I talked about Brian, the fact that he was so straightforward and to the point. He did no half measures and accepted everything in good faith exactly as it was said. We talked about silly things, like how Brian would be amazed if you asked him, "What time is it?" when we were all wearing watches. Or there was the time Brian answered the phone at home when his dad called inquiring if I was gone into the city. He asked how I went, and Brian hesitated for a second before replying, as if explaining to a fool, "Out the front door, I suppose." John recalled that Brian was an excellent runner and had finished first in the under-8 section in the marathon. He spoke about Brian, the left-footed footballer. I could feel John's pride in Brian, who was sincere and loving, never given to idle remarks. John had good friends that he spoke to at length about Brian. He accepted that all that had happened was God's will, but the emptiness The sadness beyond belief propelled him to Brian's grave every day. He talked with him every morning and night. His good friends in whom he could confide really helped him through, helped him to find clarity. We could feel Brian in every room. In the bathroom I would remember lifting his head up for the last time. But there too resided the memory of us bathing the three boys together when they were small. I'd be soaked to the skin by the time the whole procedure was over, and there'd be three shiny faces ready for bed. I also recalled a more recent bathroom incident when Brian was working part-time in the local supermarket. He had announced on the Sunday that he was going to the supermarket Christmas party that night. "No way," I answered. "If you wanted to go out tonight, you should not have stayed out until odd hours last night in town." Although I never put too much emphasis on exams, I believed that he should have been studying, and I figured that he wouldn't recover from his lack of sleep until about Wednesday. Anyway, there followed a discussion between the two of us, and an agreement was not reached. I insisted that he stay in, but the bathroom window told another story. Brian had not seen any wisdom in my words. Unless to be heard opening the front door, he opted for the bathroom window to let himself out of the house. Brian and I didn't always agree on what was right. It was so late, or early to be more accurate, when Brian got home from his Christmas party that I had calmed down from my initial fury. So I didn't say anything to him. However, in time his dad did have a word with him to impress upon him that he should fit some study into his busy life. I appreciated the ease with which Brian made friends. I was glad that, going on the basis of how he handled this part-time job, he never complained about working, and enjoyed the company of everyone he met. Perhaps this talent would serve him well in life. In the kitchen, I remembered how Brian loved the fry I cooked for brunch on Sundays. There was a kitchen stool that he fixed. "It needs a Brianing," he said, as he fixed the loose top. In the dining room, I recall Brian really loving his food, how he relished julienne carrots shiny with butter when I had the time to chop them small. I remembered how he laughed at me when I nearly set fire to the table. I spilled the brandy as I lit the plum pudding at Christmas, sending the flames running across the table. There were so many cosy times in the sitting room. When his coffin ended up there, I remember thinking that he would have liked to leave from his favourite room. Brian was always so easy to please. Like when I got his new chair, "You should have left the tag on," I remembered Brian saying. "What tag?" I inquired. "You know, the banner on my chair. It said, 'The most comfortable chair in the world.' And it really is the most comfortable chair in the world." Brian appreciated everything so much, and that made all of our lives so much easier. John remembered the hours he spent watching him sleeping on that chair, hoping and praying that he would live to see another day. I smiled as I remembered all the fun we had the year before when Brian went to a graduation dinner. With his usual enthusiasm, he had booked 2 limousines instead of the one, which totally embarrassed me. The neighbours called, and we all celebrated opening a bottle of champagne for the gang of youngsters that we photographed in front of the fire. That same photograph now graces Brian's memorial card. Another photo that just had to be included in that card was the one in which Brian is holding a prize and wearing a sweatshirt with "More Than Equal" written across his chest. How prophetic that turned out to be. The last photo on the front of his memorial card is a happy and proud Brian walking down the ramp enjoying the 4th year fashion show. The music decks sat quietly in the playroom. The boys had spent lots of time creating their own mixes on Paul's decks, but this wasn't a creative time for any of us now. We were all in shock. One Sunday, John and I felt we had to get out somewhere for a minute from the house. We were suffocating in our grief. Our home seemed like a prison where we had been engulfed in so much torture and pain. We drove to nearby Kinsale for our lunch. Coming out from the hotel, we noticed a teenage girl on crutches. It was the same place where Brian had eaten the toasted sandwich that he had so enjoyed. It was all just too much for me, and tears welled up. Leaving home, I hadn't thought about Kinsale being the last outing that Brian and I had. But the memories of walking behind Brian, dying on his crutches, the agony of it all came just rushing in on top of me. Pain strikes when you least expect it. It's still difficult when I'm asked, "Do you have any boys?" And I want to answer, I have 3. But sometimes it's not appropriate to mention a dead child, so I answer 2 when I want to say 3. It's like I'm sticking a knife into myself. It's almost a physical pain.